Sometimes the path from inspiration to painting is short. One frosty morning, one perfect sunrise was all it took to get this project started. My name's Alex Boone. I make nature journals, and I teach other people how to make them too. I work on a cycle of projects, usually every 1 or 2 years, starting something new, something that's going to push me a little bit, that's going to change my perspective on how I see nature and how I record it. This year I'm working on a project based on the Japanese calendar, 72 micro-seasons to describe nature. I've seen this done a few different ways, through photographs and through bits of nature writing, but I'm trying to do it through painting in this journal. Every 5 or so days, a new painting to represent that time of year in the place where I live. I'm going to be sharing my process here throughout this year, so you can watch along, find out what inspires me as a nature artist and how I produce the kind of work that I do. And then if you'd like to learn more or receive tutorials from me, you can come and find me at naturejournalingcircle.com. You can also join the free Nature Journaling Circle community if you'd like to find inspiration, monthly prompts, and encouragement from our other members. Here's the finished page. Now let's get out and find some more inspiration. When I go out in the field looking for inspiration for my nature journaling, I always take just the sketchbook and a pencil. I'm trying out a new method this year of recording my mood and my fatigue levels since I've been suffering with brain fog and associated fatigue. I sometimes find it easier to think clearly about how I'm going to nature journal if I go and sit outside and do that sort of thinking. So on this page I kind of planned what I'd like to do this year, and also gave it a little try because I was in just the right place to be doing it. One thing I decided I'd like to do this year is to start putting some photographs into my nature journal. My outdoor jottings can seem a bit featureless, so I decided to buy myself one of these Polaroid high print. It's a mini printer that attaches onto your phone, and you can print out little stickers that you can then put into the journal. I think it's a really fun, neat little gadget just to add a little bit of colour into this journal, but it's not something I'm going to use super regularly. The cartridges are quite expensive, and there's a bit of an environmental cost to using this too. A lot of the stuff that's in these cartridges can't be recycled, so it's just for a little bit of embellishment, now and again, a little bit of fun, and a little bit of colour. With the first spread of my micro-seasons journal done, I really needed to have a think about how I was going to lay out the rest of the journal. If you want to find out more about the micro-seasons idea, that's in my last video, so go click back and see if you can find that one, if you haven't heard all of the details about this methodology. But what I'm trying to do first and foremost is to work out how many pages I'm going to need to get through the calendar year in this micro-season method. So first thing I did was count the number of pages in my journal. The easiest way to do this is by numbering them in pencil by hand and then carefully checking through to make sure that you don't miss any. Once I had all of those numbers, I then had to split the calendar year up into little sections. It does work out that I'm making a page about every 5 days, but if you divide the number of days in the year by 5 days, you get one season too many. What I ended up doing is copying some of the ideas from a previous book that had used the micro-season calendar, but I won't be following this exactly. But I didn't want to be inside planning all the time. It was time to get out and start looking in nature for inspiration. I came out here today just to a local woodland in East Devon, and I was sort of prepared for it to be a struggle to find a micro season or find something that I want to depict right now. I mean, here it's January, it's mid-January, it's an afternoon. Everything's kind of gloomy and flat. There's plenty of colour in this landscape. We've got the various greens and browns that are kind of making up the kind of colorscape of what we're seeing right now. So today I came to the woods and I thought, well, what else can I find here that I need something a bit different. I need something to jump out at me that isn't something I've already covered or been thinking about since the winter solstice, since this project started. And amazingly enough, as I walked down into the woods, right in front of me, like maybe 1 or 1.5, maybe 2 meters in front of me, there was this beautiful tree creeper. And of course it saw me and flew to a tree a little further away, but I just waited it out and it came out again. And I just thought that's going to be absolutely perfect for this micro season. We see the tree creepers walking up and down the trees. They don't tend to walk down actually, they fly to the bottom and then they walk their way up and they feed as they go up, and then as they get as high as they want to go, they fly back down to the bottom and then they kind of go back up again. They're kind of usually seen pointing this way. They're such tiny, beautiful little birds. Just look at how their plumage matches the bark of this oak tree. And as soon as I walked onto the footpath today, it just kind of felt like I was surrounded by birds. There was this amazing sound of bird song and a really strong smell as well. Just this kind of smell of earth and plants and water. And so I'm not quite sure how, but I want to try and depict all of this in my next page. I'm just going to walk a little further and then I'm going to try and get into words some of the things that I've seen in the woods today. It's funny when you're doing this kind of micro season work, I'm trying to pull together not just things from this one visit, but also things that I've noticed over the last couple of days and trying to find what feels different in the world to me right now as a person experiencing it. I haven't kind of thought this way in my nature journaling probably for quite some time, and I'm really, really inspired by it right now. I've got this kind of creative urge to be seeking the changes in my landscape. So I really recommend giving this a try. I'm back in the studio and it is freezing today. My little heater can only make it up to 13 degrees. So I've got my woolly slippers on and I'm going to sit and paint. I'm working in my practice journal today. I want to paint the tree creeper, but first I need to figure out how to make a background that really represents the kind of misty green, brown, grey of the woods that day. So I'm going to try out in here a kind of wet technique using a lot of water and my Derwent Inktense paints. Now these dry permanent, so it's really important to keep everything wet as I'm trying to make this soft blended background. Even laying in these shapes of the trees into the wet to make sure that they kind of look blurred and misty and exciting. And then when I'm happy with this background, I'm going to paint the tree creeper over the top. I think it must be nearly time for coffee. No, it isn't. No. For this second spread in my journal, I'm going to do a painting of these birch trees because I just found so much inspiration in them. And I'm going to take you through this one in a little bit more detail. I have 3 reference photos on the iPad you just saw there, and I'm just going to combine those to sketch out a kind of imagined birch woodland that represents what I saw on a few different days in a few different woodlands. Once I'm done with that underlying drawing, I'm going to use my fine liner to get a little bit more definition into all of these intricate, interesting branches. I'm using a 0.2. I'm just going to run over the entirety of that drawing that I just did. It takes a little while to do this, but a steady hand and continuous stroke is the ticket. That's what's really going to make these lines look really good. You have to be brave and just keep that pen in continuous motion. Just putting in the last few marks with the fine liner before we'll be ready to start getting in with some paint. And one of the things that was really interesting about this woodland, or about the way that these trees appear in winter, is the kind of distance that you get when you're looking through them, and it just looks as if they kind of go on forever. To reproduce this, I've mixed a few different colours onto my palette. The main one that I'm using right now is a mixture of a spring green and a yellow ochre, which creates this kind of really interesting olivey green, which is exactly what I saw when I was looking through that woodland. And I kind of want to keep the background here really nice and white to reflect those deep clouds that we've had so recently, where everything just looks kind of saturated in white. But I'm using lots and lots of little marks and just continually painting this. It took a little while and I needed to take a few breaks and kind of leave it till the next day. It's this sort of thing, when you're focused on it for a long time, can make your eyes go a bit funny. Especially when you're working with these tiny little brushes. And I'm trying to get all of the details here actually in paint, which means very slow, very gentle work with a tiny little paintbrush. And it's like the fractal nature of these branches, right? All the branches are continually getting smaller and smaller until you can't see them anymore. Take a look at my palette here. We have a good mixture of browns, blue browns, red browns, and the green that I mentioned earlier. And look at how those have been transferred into making this kind of horizon. Now I'm going more towards the reddish browns because I want to lay in the forest floor. And in birch woodland, when you have a lot of twigs that fall down, they cast everything a kind of red because of the reddish colour of all of those fallen branches. The secret to making this kind of interesting dappled woodland floor is shifting around your browns from the bluish colours to the reddish colours to those that are a little bit more yellow, and avoiding anything that's too dark, especially here on the forest floor, because all of these dark areas we want to be up in the branches here. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm painting in all of the trees here. Notice how I've painted in the shadows first. In Derwent Inktense this works really well because that lower layer is going to dry completely permanent, and then I can lay these lighter greens over the top. Just adding a few more little details, little dark patches, little areas of green, something to kind of draw the eye and make this look more realistic. It's just a matter of finding all of those tiny little details that remain before I'm happy to say that the painting part is completely done. Now that the painting part is done, I need to get into my scrap box because I remember that I had some paper birch bark in here. This is bark from the paper birch tree. There was one in my sister's garden. It took a long time for it to get properly flat and to not want to be in the coiled form of a tree. I've grabbed some tracing paper and I'm just using that to mark out on where the areas are that I want to cover, getting both sides covered in pencil and then using the tracing paper to press the pencil onto my paper bark. As I work my way down here and just kind of along my piece of birch bark, I'm marking out on the tracing exactly where I've covered, so therefore I know that I've done the entirety of this little area. You can see here what it looks like when I've got all of the pencil marked on. Now I started out with a Stanley knife trying to cut this, but I found it a little bit too awkward and it felt as though the bark was actually going to tear, so I quickly gave up and used a pair of scissors instead. Now begins the careful task of gluing down all of my little bits of bark. I'm using EVA glue and a paintbrush. I'm painting all over each piece here on the newspaper and then taking it over and sticking it down, working in the layers from the bottom to the top. I've got a spare bit of paper here and I'm just pressing down on to really make sure that we get really good adhesion of each piece of bark onto the painting. I'm just sort of lining everything up, making sure that everything's going to fit. I sometimes had to cut a little bit of extra bark to kind of make everything fit perfectly. It's like making a little jigsaw puzzle out of all of those pieces of bark that I had already cut out. You see here just how effective this is. I'm quite happy with it. I've now just got to move across and get all of the rest of it done in exactly the same way. And here's the finished page with the collage elements laid on. You see that they create a beautiful contrast to the painting underneath. Thank you so much for watching the first few pages of this year. I'll leave you with this lovely footage of feeding the robins in my local nature reserve. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.